Hi there. Welcome to the Sober Circle channel. Enjoy this speaker tape.
Oh, Bob asked me if I would mind picking him up at the airport and asked me to call. I thought he still lived in Denver. And I finally got a hold of Dick's secretary, and she says, well, he would be back, and we'd begin to talk about the time. And finally I had the presence and forethought to ask her, where the hell are you? And she says, we're in Pleasanton, California. And I said, what's he doing out there? He's supposed to be in Denver. Well, he had moved from one spot to the other, but he just didn't bother to tell me that. Well, circuit speakers are a bit devious, you might know. And I called my good friend Jerry Jones to tell me if there was anything that I had to watch out for from Dick. And he says, yes, one thing you have to watch out for from him is that he never brings his watch. And he always borrows his watch from me before he gets up there, and he never gives it back. And Dick still has my Mickey Mouse watch. I was talking to Dick over the telephone, and I told him that I was going to pick him up at the airport. And Dick says, how will I know you? And I said, Dick, you will just intuitive know. You will just intuitive. He says, listen, the last time you Texas bastard did that to me, I was wandering around the airport for 4 hours before you found me. But this morning we intuitively knew. Another thing about Dick, I have a tremendous identity with Dick. When I first came into the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, I could not find a periodic drunk. And Dick is a periodic drunk. Now, from Dick's definition of a periodic drunk, that's a wimpy drinker. For my definition of a periodic drunk, it is one that is afflicted with economic insecurity. I was too damn tight to drink every day. So we had a bit of a problem there. There is another story that I might share about Dick. And it reminds me of a line that I heard in a movie. But it's always fun to play with circuit speakers a bit, and you always play the thing that, in 1972, Dick, I heard this. Do you remember when you said, you see? And who the hell is going to remember it, But Dick always thinks of something. But this particular occasion in the movie, some of you may have seen the movie. It was a movie, it was called Baja, Oklahoma. And in Baja, Oklahoma, there was this scene that there was this Al-Anon, and have you ever seen the Al-Anon glare? One eye goes down, the other one goes up, And there was this Al-Anon, there was this Al-Anon in the forefront, stepped like this, and just behind her was her mother, just like this. And they were training the daughter who was just behind her, just like this. And she says, as the gentleman walks in from being out all night, George, where in the hell have you been? And he says, I was working on Sam Blair's car all night long. And it was so late when I come in, I knew you three lovely women were sleeping, and I didn't want to wake you, and I slept in the hammock outside. And she says, George, I took that hammock down 3 weeks ago. And he said, that may be so, but that's my story, and I'm sticking with it. And Dick always sticks with his story. Would you help me welcome, please, Dick G. from Pleasant, California.
Hi, I'm going to take one of these chips. My name is Dick. I was out of work. My name is Dick Grant, and I'm an alcoholic. And it is good to be back in my spiritual home, which is Texas. And I mean that very sincerely. This is really my spiritual home. I have had a lot more invitations than sanity warrants to speak down here, but I never fail to come because I really have had so many blessed moments at Texas conferences, and I really appreciate being asked back. Of course, for an alcoholic of my variety, it's just nice to be asked back anywhere. They used to take their number out of the phone book after I went to their party, unless they wanted to get their couch dried out. Anyway, it really is good to be here. It's good to see Blanche again, particularly go second, be able to clear up the confusion. Yeah, I was particularly glad to see Blanche. The committee's trying to cut expenses, and Blanche and I are sharing a room. and I heard she was teaching a sex education class, and I thought it was a lab. Since she teaches it at night. Anyway, I was wondering if it was helping her, and I can tell you that it has, because when she came into the room, she was unpacking, and I said, just for curiosity, I thought this would be a good question to ask her. I said, what kind of a nightgown did you bring? And she brought out a box of Saran wrap. Y'all may wonder why Blanche is still single. That's because she goes to so many Al-Anon meetings. And to explain that, you see, all she meets are men in Al-Anon, and it's absolutely impossible for two Al-Anons to marry. Did you know that? The reason is, if one Al-Anon married another Al-Anon, later when things got rough, they wouldn't have a drunk to blame for it. All right, I'll get off the Al-Anon stories. I'm married to a black belt Al-Anon, and the grapevine always tells on me when I do these things. So anyway, I want to thank the committee for asking me down, and it just always comes at the right time. There's no coincidences anymore. And the day I started noticing that was the day that I really started to enjoy my sobriety in AA. But, I'd like to talk tonight about groups, because this is the celebration of a group, and I thought I'd just talk about my life, my alcoholism, and my sobriety as it regards to groups of people. But I'd like to give you all a little test tonight, if I could, just to see if you belong here. You see, I'm going to give you this test, and I want you to listen real close, and then afterwards we're going to see which one of you qualify. Now, here's my premise. Okay, listen closely to see if you identify with it. I've decided that I'm going to start a new organization. Okay? Now, the public relations policy for my organization is going to be that in order to join, you have to admit you're a failure. And what you do after you admit you're a failure is you go to where a bunch of people are who have been failures longer than you. Now, when you go there, what you have to do is exactly the opposite of what you think you ought to do. All your life, you figured out how things ought to go, and this bunch of failures now are going to tell you that you're going to have to do everything backwards from the way you want to do it. Right? And let me give you a couple examples of that. You're going to come in, and they're going to say, grab on and let go. And then they're going to say, easy does it, but do something. And of course, right away I asked, what if I make a mistake? They said, we got a step for that. And what they want you to do is they want you to stand up in front of a bunch of people whom you don't know, whose last names you don't even know, so you can't track them down later in case they do something, right? You ever figured it that way, huh? You're not going to you're not going to know their last name, so in case they pull something, you'll never be able to find them. What you're going to have to do is stand up in front of a bunch of failures and admit what a great failure you've been. And that given your very best thinking, your highest education, and all the willpower you could muster, that you probably couldn't find your own rear end with a flashlight. Then after that is that in front of all these strangers who may report it to God knows who, you've got to tell them you're crazy. And then that's going to feel good. So you're going to say that something that you've been denying all these years is going to fix it. And that'll make sense. And so then what you have to do is you then have to sit down and have a conversation with something you can't see or hear. Now, you're well into this now. So the next thing you get to do is you're going to write down all the things you've been trying to hide all your life. And then you're going to go tell somebody who's been a failure longer than you have. And then the two of you are going to talk that over, and then you're going to start talking about all the things that you do that are bad and wrong. And then you're going to sit down, you're going to talk to that thing again you can't see, touch, taste, or feel, and you're going to ask him to take them away. Even though you don't mean it. Now that we're launched into this now, in this new way of life, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to make a list of everybody we've ever screwed over in our whole life. And go tell them. And now, having achieved the pinnacle of self-revelation, having graduated, we're going to sit down every day and figure out how we're screwing up again. And we're going to sit down, we're going to talk it over with whoever it is you can't see, touch, taste, or feel. And then, because this is working so well in your life, we want you to go find some more failures and share this with them. Without smiling. Anybody here identify? Would like to join my group? Hey, you're in the right place. You see, because that's what I was hearing when I came here. I thought, my God, these people are crazy. And they kept saying, yeah, but you are too. And that irritated me. Because by this time, I thought I had everybody pretty well convinced that I was the pinnacle of human intellectual development. And I find myself in this place. I couldn't go anywhere else. I'd run out. The only place I could go was they thought I was stupid. And they told me that. And they said, if you're so smart, why are you here? I said, yes, but. Well, I've never been good in groups. The first group that I failed at was the one I was born into. Some of us have the touch, and we do it right from the start. I will characterize my lack of success with this first group of people with whom I had to interact on a meaningful basis by telling you a day in the life of the Grant family. I would come home from school, and I would stop at the corner and look around to see if there was an ambulance or a police car in front of the house. You see, because I was blessed with two alcoholic parents. Never dull when you have two alcoholic parents. It's not all that bad either, really. Because one or more of them were usually drunk, so I'd always be able to steal money from them, and I was doing well. Fear of financial insecurity was not my problem at that time. And then if it was quiet so far, and it was one of those times when they were just going to have a couple of drinks, you know, well, usually by dinner, that's burning on the stove. Somebody's passed out, and somebody is either breaking a whiskey bottle over somebody else's head, or my sister and I are chasing our parents with knives. I would pause from time to time and reflect upon the nature of our relationship. And I found it distressing. So I began to look around. So the next thing was, I thought I would join my peers. You know, peers became very important at this time in life. So I sidled on up to a group of them, only to discover a couple of terrifying truths. One, they had read a chapter in How to Do Your Life that I had missed. And secondly, that there was a pane of glass that separated me from them, and I could never really get close to them. So given the emotional nurturing that I'd had as a child, I immediately decided that meant I was superior to them. I changed peer groups. Fortunately, I had traveling drunks for a family. We'd move around a lot, and so I got to change new groups all the time. You know, I think that's why I got so good at failing with people, is I had so many chances to start over. But I would go from group to group, and I would have that same experience. You know, I'd say this time it's going to be different, and I'd walk into the group, and immediately I'd sense like the seat of my pants was ripped out. My fly was open. And they were all whispering behind my back, but every time I turned around, they'd quit. And I knew that whenever I left the room, they immediately huddled. And they would discuss how I didn't do it right. So I would walk back in with bravado. Fortunately, I found that there was a substance which gave me more of that. And I began to use that substance as frequently as I could. Because the more times I failed at getting along with people and groups of people, the more I needed to feel different than the way I felt. So I used booze. Next group I belonged to was a fraternity in college. My relationship with my fraternity brothers went like this. I was the social chairman for 4 years. I seemed to have a talent for getting liquor cheaper than anybody in the house, and could make arrangements with bars and hotels for social events better than anyone else. I was the first social chairman they ever had while I was still a pledge. At least they could recognize talent when they found it. What's funny about my relationship with those guys, one time I got particularly drunk in the house and came home, back to the fraternity house, and I wrote poetry on the walls of the basement. And it was the most morose, suicidal, dark poetry you could ever imagine. If you remember a guy named Ferlinghetti in the Beat Generation, about that time, it was that kind of poetry. I was into Ferlinghetti and Jack Kerouac and all that kind of thing. Do you remember that? And I wrote that kind of poetry on way sicker than anything those guys ever thought of. And I wrote it on the walls of the fraternity house. And it just stayed there, and nobody ever mentioned it. You know, there's a great ad for alcoholism. I don't know if they run it down here, but it shows a typical American family with an elephant walking around in the house, and nobody notices the elephant. Well, that's the way my relationship was with my fraternity brothers. I had some sort of bizarre appeal and power within that group, but yet nobody wanted to be close to me. And I knew that. But fortunately, the unrecognized humanitarian of all time, Adolf Coors, had his plant 15 miles down the road. So I was never without. I went to college in Colorado, and I remember distinctly asking some of my friends and my acquaintances in high school where they were going to school, and they asked me where I was going. I said, well, Colorado, because you can drink when you're 18. That was the reason I went to the University of Colorado, because you only had to be 18 to drink. I was also accepted to Mexico City College, but my father thought it over and decided that wasn't a real good idea. He even had his clear moments. Well, after this warm, meaningful relationship that I had with these fellows in this college fraternity, and I might mention along the way that I had some rather symbiotic relationships with ladies during that time. I remember one gal, I'm sure she married an alcoholic later, because she kept coming back for more. You know, for 4 years we met at a rush party, right after rush week. We met at some mixer, you know, in our freshman year. And over and over and over, she would show up again about every 2 or 3 months just to see, you know, maybe she was feeling good, I don't know, and wanted to get over it. But I remember one time when we were seniors, just before we graduated, she came back for one more time. And I remember we went out for coffee, and we were sitting in a drive-in eating hamburgers and drinking coffee out under parked under some trees. And I remember her turning to me, and she said, you know, I've known you for 4 years, and we've tried over and over again to make a go of it. We have an attraction for each other, but we can't seem to make a go of it. And she looked at me, and she said, what is the matter with you? Oh. And I did that most uncharacteristic thing of an alcoholic. I told her. And I started to cry. So I could never see her again, because I'd cried. she called me not long ago. They were having a reunion at school, and she called me. That woman just, And she asked me one more time, how are you? And I just said, better, thank you. I went on from there. United States Navy offered me a romantic career, sailing through the skies at supersonic speed and just, being wonderful. So I went to pre-flight training and didn't get along with anybody in my class because I used to get drunk and morose on the weekends in pre-flight. I once went out and sat in a Dempsey dumpster and drank by myself just so I could enjoy it. I used to go down to Pensacola Beach and drink by myself in the sand dunes because nobody understood. I remember a fellow going through there. He and I had an affinity. He was a great guy, and he happened to play quarterback in college, and he and I were playing on an intramural team, and we were just a natural fit. He happened to be an extremely talented quarterback, and I happened to have some athletic ability, and we were noticed by some scouts and offered a 4-year career playing football for the Navy. And he said he would if I would. And I thought it over, and what that meant was making a commitment to another man for 3 years to maintain that kind of an intimate relationship, so naturally I walked away. That was too close. That was just too close. And when it got to hurt too much, I'd go drink. I was a periodic alcoholic. That's the hard way to go. That's the hard way to go. Maintenance drinkers never sober up. The worst part of drinking is sobering up. Right? The next group was the squadron. And that's where I came in with all the potential in the world. Potential. That last refuge of conversation for the alcoholic. When they got you cornered, talk about your potential. They talk about performance and we talk about potential. One of the things I liked about pre-flight was that you had to go to church in those days. And the Catholics got out earlier, so I started going there. I figured that was because they'd been at it longer. But the nice thing about that is you had to go through kind of a little ceremony where you're supposed to get down and kneel, when you entered the aisle, and you could sit there and pray. And I used to pray to the God that didn't exist, just in case. And I realized I was in big trouble because I got through high school and college with no math. Now I am now taking calculus, trigonometry, chemistry, aerodynamics, and physics. And I never had any math. And I used to go there, and I could, and I pretend like I wasn't praying, but I was, because you got to look good. Real important to an alcoholic, look good. And I used to pray, but pretend I wasn't. And I used to pray to the God that didn't exist, just in case. And I graduated third in my class. And I remember thinking, as I was standing out there at the graduation ceremonies, I didn't do this. I didn't do this. So I thought, how nice. Maybe there is something you can call on if you really need them. But I didn't need them anymore. So I forgot about it. Went on to the squadron, told how much potential I had, what a good job I was doing. But every once in a while, I'd have to have one of those negative discussions with the current authority figure in my life that were typical of my drinking career. And I remember the commanding officer of the squadron standing there one day saying, Dick, you're one of the most capable officers I have. You're my intelligence officer, which really worries me. And here you stand before me, having been arrested while participating in a naked hedge hopping contest. And he said, why is that? And I said, because I slipped. I missed the point. See, alcoholics don't listen real well. I thought he was asking me, why did I get caught? That the only thing wrong to me in my alcoholism was if you got caught. That was the only thing. Doing wrong was getting caught. That was it. That was my morality. I was also the social chairman of the squadron. arranged all the parties, put together all the things, because I wanted it to look okay. I was trying to take sick, bizarre behavior and wrap it in a mantle of social, carefree, high-spirited, bright, clever, and interesting. So I found how to do that for a while. But once again, I found myself walking into rooms where people quieted down when I walked in, because I'd gotten drunk one too many times. And I began to experience that thing called behavior change when you drink. And I would go to the officers' club meaning to be hail fellow, well met, and one of the guys, and then I'd black out, and apparently I'd sit at the end of the bar, and I would become sarcastic and abusive and argumentative. And then I'd go to the squad room the next morning, and everybody would quiet when I walked into the room. And I felt alone. I felt like I didn't belong, because I didn't. I have a sponsor who, in the early days, when I would tell him that I felt like a misfit, he said, "It's because you're a misfit." Practicing alcoholics just don't integrate well. And I said, "I feel guilty about all this stuff." And he said, "It's because you're guilty." He said, "If you do to people what you did to people, I would hope you would feel guilty. If you don't, there's no hope for you at all." Well, the next group I decided to join was a group of two. I decided that I need to clean my act up, and I looked around for various solutions, and I struck on what I found to have been a very common one for alcoholics. I'll get married. So fortunately, I landed from being in 9 months in Vietnam and walked into a cocktail lounge one evening, and there she was, Miss Wright. She was emotionally frozen, looking for a daddy. Or she said later, "I was looking for a knight on a white horse. You rode up and fell off the horse." And your armor was wet. Anyway, it was a match made in heaven. As we've said so often, we deserved each other. The fact that Jay and I are still together is the proof that there's a loving God, because by keeping us together, He spared 2 other people. Somewhere out there tonight, there are 2 people who don't know God loves them. Well, our relationship was terrific. Just terrific. I got drunk the night we were married. She came down with agoraphobia. You know what that is? She didn't come down with it. She manifested it. She kept it hidden through most of our courtship, and it came into full flower. And 3 days after we were married, she was locked in a hospital with tachycardia, and I was drunk down at the bar. And that's how our marriage started. We honeymooned in the cottage where the Jack and Jackie Kennedy honeymooned. And 3 days later, she's in the hospital and I'm drunk in a bar. And it went downhill from there. But we hung in there. If there's nothing else that Jay and I bring to life, it's a tolerance for pain. Four years into this wonderfulness that we had together. Now, see, I'm an alcoholic. I figured she had somebody call that thing so she could get out of here. Why would I think of that, Bob? But I'm not sensitive. One morning on February 16th, 1969, I got up and went downstairs after what I unwittingly realized now was my last drink. I walked down there, and our group wasn't doing well that morning. She had the 1,000-mile look. And I was filled with self-revulsion, a sense of impending doom, and I had a bad attitude. It was so bad that I started to talk to her about my drinking. And once we were into that subject, it seemed like we couldn't stop. So to get her off my back, I asked her to call AA. And in her sickness, she did. She knows now that what she should have done was tell me to call AA. But we were both ill enough that it worked, and she did, and here I am. Just goes to show the power of this thing is you can start it wrong and still get it right. I just love AA. I'm crazy about AA. I don't think there's anything on earth quite like, when I say AA, I mean AA, Al-Anon, Alateen, Alatot, the whole deal. I don't think there's anything on earth quite like this program. It is more fun, it's more exciting, it's more humorous, it's more backwards, it's more unusual, it's more exotic than anything I know in life. I mean, you take your new group, for an example. AA, the Al-Anon program, are the only place on earth where something good can come out of a resentment. Ever thought about that? You know what it takes to start a new group? A resentment and a dozen donuts. And we're growing. Well, I went to my first AA meeting. And I found out a couple of things about you all. Number one, you didn't look right. You look too good. Couldn't be alcoholics like me. You look too good. You look like you do tonight. You're just beautiful tonight. You really are. I sat and listened to a guy tell my story and figured out that Jay had called him in the afternoon and given him the details. But I tolerated her good intentions. Only chewed her out for about 10 minutes. But I looked around there and I realized that those people had a cohesiveness that I'd never experienced in my life. And I was attracted to that, but I couldn't let you know that. I couldn't tell you, but I was attracted by it. So I hung around the edge of AA for 3 months. Finally went to a meeting where you had to go around and introduce yourself. Everybody had to introduce themselves. And they came around to me and I said, "My name's Dick," and I don't know. I wasn't into deep commitments at that time. And they came up afterwards and they said, "We're so glad to hear you're here about your drinking. We thought you were a college student doing a paper." Stay cool. Stay cool. Well, I didn't have anybody's phone number, and they didn't have mine, and I didn't know anybody's name, and after 6 months of this grid program, I moved to Los Angeles in Santa Barbara, which meant now I could really get lost. This was a small group there. This would be a small group where I was going. Usually 200 or 300 people, and they all run around kissing and hugging and, pretending like they're happy. Thought I. So I would come late and leave early, hang out in the men's room during the coffee break, and think to myself, they all act like they belong here. Why don't I? Why don't I? That group later turned out to be my first home group at the Stag group in Beverly Hills that meets on Wednesday night. If you're ever out in LA, you got to go there. It's a colorful event. You get a real slice of life in Beverly Hills at a Stag meeting, I'll tell you. We had movie stars and con men and drivers for the mafia and defrock priests and every known kind of salesman in the world. Well, after a year of working this great program and not belonging to AA, I ran away from home because she was dragging me into the depths of her illness, said I. And I became a part of this group because one night I made a mistake and I got up in front of the group. They call you up by random up to talk up to 5 minutes. And I made the mistake of getting up there unprepared and without my look good on, and I slipped and told them the truth. Nobody's perfect. And I started to cry, and I said, I think I'm flunking AA. And afterwards, a guy came up to me and appointed himself as my sponsor. I was later to point out many times that I didn't ask him. And he would say things like, well, if I'd known what I was getting into, I wouldn't have done it either. But you see, the first group that I could belong to was a group of two again, my sponsor and I. I finally found a man who seemed to genuinely care about me and who had asked me questions about me and acted like he wanted to hear the answers. So we would go to a meeting every night. He was a bachelor, an actor, always out of work. Don't have those actors make it. They never work. And we'd go to dinner every night, and then we would go to a meeting, and then we'd go out for coffee, and we'd walk up and down Wilshire Boulevard and talk. And weekends we would drive around and just talk. Go to meetings, drive out to the beach or drive out to the desert, and just talk. We talked about all the things that I'd always wanted to talk about with my own family, and I never had a chance to, because they just weren't there. I'm sure they would have liked to, but there was just nobody home. Nobody home. As Marcy says, they didn't have the blessing. They couldn't give it to me. Well, I finally became, for the first time in my life, I became a part of a group, and it was the two of us. But you see, for me, for this alcoholic, that was the wrong group to belong to. There's a group of two that I have to belong to before I can belong anywhere else. And the other person isn't my sponsor. So the other member of the group that I now belong to saw fit to have me transferred. I moved out of town and my sponsor got drunk. And I was all alone again, I thought. Except along the way I had picked up a couple of things. Even though I didn't agree with it, I didn't understand how it would happen, and I couldn't tell how it would turn out, I had begun talking to the God that didn't exist. Simply because everybody else did. And I wanted to be one of the guys. And I also noticed that things were changing in my life. And I hung on as long as I could, trying to attribute it to coincidence. But I finally couldn't attribute it to coincidence any longer. I have so many God stories in 19 years, it would be intellectually dishonest of me to attribute to anything other than the fact that there is a loving Heavenly Father who loves Dick Grant very much and seems to want to show that as often as he possibly can. He seems fascinated with the business of delivering His grace to me on a moment-to-moment basis. Don't know why. I guess that's what makes Him God. That must be why He's God. Because He's the only one that can do it that way and not it. So I found out there drinking. I don't recall the subject coming up. But I found a group of guys who wanted to teach each other and share with each other on how to work the steps. And I'll tell you how that worked. One of the greatest times I ever had was we had a guy come in who just couldn't write his fourth step. He wanted to. We explained to him the 4 columns on the resentment and the fear list and the sex inventory, who you put on there, all that stuff. But he just somehow emotionally couldn't do it. And because we had learned the principle that you work steps together, you don't just beat up on somebody telling them they have to work steps. I walked over to him one night in a moment of inspiration, which I have every 3 years. And I said, I'll pick you up at 8 o'clock in the morning. You're going to go out with me tomorrow. And I'm in sales, and so I was, it was one of the days where I was out making sales calls all day. So, crazy. He was crazy too, and he showed up. And I said, all you have to have is a pencil, piece of paper. So what we did was we talked about working the steps. I'd go and we'd stop the car, and I'd go in on my sales call, and he'd write. And I'd come back out, and we'd go over what he wrote. And we'd talk about the next thing he had to write. And I'd go in the next sales call, and he'd write and come back out. You see? And that way, he got to work his 4 steps. Because I didn't point my finger at him. I didn't tell him how wonderful I was because I had. I sat down with him and I wrote his 4 steps. And I thank God for that group that taught me that. I had to leave Denver a little over a year ago. I shucked and jived for 5 years trying to make business go my way. And the other member of my group didn't seem to agree. So one day in January of '87, I had to put stuff in the car and kiss my wife and children goodbye and drive to California. And I think we had one of our most meaningful meetings driving to San Francisco over a 2-day period. Because I screamed at him to Vail, and I cried to Grand Junction. And then I started to just, I turned off the radio. I remember distinctly outside Grand Junction in eastern Utah. I turned off the radio, and I said, I am going to drive until I either run out of gas or I hear God. And somewhere in eastern Utah, something started coming into my mind. And it was a line from something that I'd heard years ago. And it was a line from an old hymn that says, "It is well with my soul." You see, and I realized throughout it all, the move, the marital problems, the job problems, it has always been well with my soul because I'm an AA member. So he and I had a heck of a great time across Nevada. I might add, there's nothing else to do. You might as well have a spiritual experience because there's nothing else to do in it. Well, there are a couple of things, but I didn't choose to participate, no. So now I'm in Northern California, and I don't like California. Particularly, it's crowded and expensive, and the pace of life is just nuts. I mean, they invented frantic out there. And I got there, and I checked into the hotel, and it was a Friday night, and I was supposed to start work Monday. And I'm 48 years old, and I'm afraid I'm going to fail. And what do you do if you fail when you're 48? Seemed awfully old at the time. I was sitting in that hotel room, and I thought I really ought to go to a meeting tonight. And I thought, no, I don't want to have to start all over again. I don't want to have to go through all the conversations and all the coffee and all the late nights. I don't want to have to do it again, God. It isn't fair. I've done it. It's been 18 years. I don't want to have to do it again. So I sat there in a hotel room, 5 o'clock in the evening, and I asked myself, where do I belong? So I picked up the phone, called Alcoholics Anonymous. And it was my first AA meeting that night. And they don't do it really great in Northern California. But they're getting better. My home group is now a Saturday morning meeting. We meet at 8:15 on Saturday morning. Everybody said the group would never make it. You never get people to get up at 8:15 on Saturday morning. Well, we've been meeting for over a year now. We study the steps one at a time. And around about 9 months, the group had gotten to average around 20 to 30 people studying the steps, talking how to work the steps, not why you ought to work the steps. And we decided that we would study the traditions one at a time. And there were predictions of doom and disaster. We averaged 50 during the time we studied the traditions, one at a time. And being, off the wall as I am, I would walk over to some of these newer people and I would say, why the hell are you here? And they'd say, I've been in AA for years and nobody ever told me how to use the traditions. And I realized that we do the same thing with the traditions that we do with the steps. We talk about why we ought to use the traditions, and we talk about how great it is to use the traditions. But nobody ever tells you how to use the traditions. I had my first glimmer at that back when O'Leary got a hold of me one day, and I was complaining about my wife. And he said to me, have you ever noticed the other scroll hanging on the walls next to the steps? I said, yeah, they're the traditions. He said, do you understand what the traditions are? And I realized I was in trouble. Of course, when you're a good alcoholic, if you ever get really pinned in the corner, you just say, oh. He said, those are spiritual principles which are designed to help you get along with other people. I said, oh. And he said, I have news for you. Your wife is a people. Oh. Well, this group has been just great. My physician is a member of that group. I mean, where else do you meet people like this? You know who my family doctor is now? He's currently treating me for something called pleurisy. I've had it for 6 weeks. I'm not coughing up here for some reason. Isn't that funny? It's coincidence I wouldn't cough up here. And it's to the point now where he asks me not to sit next to him at meetings because it makes him look bad. My doctor currently was the team doctor for the Who. Rock group called the Who. That's my family physician now. Why does that make sense? So I go in to see him once a week and insult him, and then he tells me that I still have it, and we part friends. But you know what this program's given me? I'm probably one of the few guys in the world who's ever gone to his family physician. And, you know, we quickly get the medical stuff out of the way because we want to talk about the good stuff, you know, about the program. And we got talking about something once, and he got sharing with me something very personal to him, and I told him something that I learned that was just apparently what he needed to know. I'm probably one of the few guys who's ever been hugged by his family physician with tears streaming down his face and told that he loves him. You know that? Not many people get that from a family physician. Billy has a great bedside manner. Another guy in our group is a fellow with 24 years of sobriety who is just a good AA. 24 years, sponsors 4 or 5 people at a time, goes to 5 or 6 AA meetings, found AA in prison back in New York. He's a salesman like me, and he and I hang out together. And every time I ask him a question, he tells me a story. Same thing Larry does. Every time I call Larry with a problem, he tells me a story. I never get a straight answer. He tells me a story about a guy who went through something and learned something. Never give me an answer. Good AAs, I find, usually don't try to give advice. They tell you stories. True stories. It happened to them or somebody else. There's a young lady in our group who's been sober for 10 years. And I met her one night right after I got there. And she and I just happened to have this kind of click, you know, because she got up, she was speaking, she had just moved there from Washington, D.C., and she's a step thumper like I am. So I went up to her after she spoke and told her how much I enjoyed it, and we went out with a bunch of people and had coffee that night. Next time I saw her, she called up Jay and I and came over to our house and said that her mother was dying and would we pray with her. The other day she announced that she was getting married, and she asked me if I would stand up for her. I would give her a ride. So those are the kinds of relationships that I have built. Now you have to understand that I am a sick, egocentric, selfish, lazy alcoholic by nature. I'm shy, sensitive, and I don't take rejection well. But here I am in a place I didn't want to be, walking into meetings, and some Saturday mornings I sit in the back of that meeting and I look at them and I see the vigor and I see the spark jumping from person to person, the magic going on in there, and I just sit there and cry because I love it so much. And that's not like me. That's not like me. I just took over as I don't even know what my title is, but I'm leading a FAA, you know, they give you a responsibility but you don't get any title. I'm leading a beginners group, and I haven't done that for years. And there are about 20 of these crazy people that are, you know, new sobriety that show up every Tuesday night and sit and listen to me. And I've learned that they can get well without my talking. That all I do, that I'm just a catalyst to start the conversation. And we have a beginners group now where beginners raise their hand and say, how do you work steps? Next Tuesday, because one asked, he said, how do you pick a sponsor? God, where did we get that? I couldn't ask that when I was new. I had to look good. I couldn't ask, how do you pick a sponsor? I never knew how. I never had. They picked me. How are we doing on time? Are we out time? How much? Not really. We're out, yeah. I'm sorry, I didn't realize we were running this long. But I'd like to just close by talking about this group thing a little bit further. I was taking a newcomer to a meeting the other night, and he turned to me in the car and he said, "Why do you go to meetings?" He said, "You've been sober for 19 years. He said, "Why do you go to meetings?" That's funny. I haven't thought about it for a while. And you see, the problem is that because anonymity is the spiritual foundation of all these traditions, I couldn't tell him. The reason I go to meetings is I try to help somebody. But if I told him that, then it wouldn't be anonymity and it wouldn't count anymore. And I gave him some answer like, "I get such a bang out of AA, I wouldn't want to give it up." You know? But that's not true. That's not true. The other member of my group and I talk every morning. And I remember once hearing somebody say in the Alcoholics Anonymous meeting that God didn't mean for us to understand Him, because how can a finite mind understand the infinite? And that didn't make sense to me. I thought, that's a lot of crap. It seems to me the book of Alcoholics Anonymous talks a lot about coming to understand God. And it seems to me in those stories, those people have come to understand God. Then maybe God really means for me to understand Him. And at about 5 years sobriety, that started the greatest thing I've ever done in my life. The most exciting, most rewarding, most humorous thing I've ever done in my life. And that was to get to know the other member of my group. And I do that a lot of ways, and how I do that isn't important. It's that I do it. That's what matters. And I found out that I could be religious and spiritual. I am religious now, but I am spiritually religious. And that makes all the difference. Our pastor the other day asked me why I picked the church, and I couldn't tell him. Because the reason I picked the church was they needed me. And isn't that funny? I'm a flaky, self-centered, pseudo-intellectual, hip, slick, and cool alcoholic. And yet I walked into this congregation of people, and after a few weeks I realized that I had something to bring there that they were missing, and that it was real, and it was valid, and had nothing to do with my wonderfulness. So I couldn't tell my pastor why. I'm trying to ease the program on this poor guy gently, But he's a good guy. He talks about being an adult child of an alcoholic. And of course he wants me to start an AA meeting in the church. He wants me to have a church AA meeting, right? I've spent 2 mornings explaining to him why that doesn't work. And he hasn't heard me yet. But we're getting there. We're getting there. And every once in a while, on a beautiful Sunday morning, I'll be walking into that Sunday school class. And the sun shines a lot where I live, and the birds sing on Sunday mornings. And I'll feel right. Like I felt tonight when I walked outside before the meeting, just to check in with my group. And I'll feel right. And I'll know that I am competent to do that which I've been given to do that day. And all my life, I felt I was a misfit. I felt that I had some perversion or some flaw that would never be cured, would never be healed. But you see, because I belonged to a group in Denver that for 6 or 7 years met together once a week, and we were committed to each other's well-being to the expense of our own, I found out that all the other guys in that group thought they had the same thing. You see, that's why we need home groups. That's why we need to make a commitment to a group and stay there and be transparent. And you don't have to look good. You don't have to be hip, slick, and cool. The only place on earth where we're so desperate that our life is going down the drain, we go to the last place we want to go and immediately try to prove to them that we don't need to be there. You see, what I do isn't important. Please don't take exception to my sharing of what I do in my spiritual and religious life. You see, that doesn't matter. That isn't the point. The point is that I am a hopeless alcoholic. Left to my own devices, I would be insane and locked up or dead tonight. And yet, I can walk on airplanes to go to some city Or I can walk into that class on Sunday morning and know that I'm not great, I'm not terrific, I'm not wonderful, but I'm competent by the grace of God. And only by the grace of God. You see, because it has to be in spite of me. I am competent today to be who I am, to fail at business, to have teenagers who don't do it right, but I'm competent today to be who I'm supposed to be. And it's because I got in front of an AA group and started a process of saying, I'm scared to death and I think I'm flunking AA. And that's where it began. That's where it began to the group, just like it began for me with God. The night that I was drinking port wine all by myself while my wife was at a sensitivity group. And I looked up in the sky and I said, oh God, I didn't mean to turn out like this. And that's when it began. Because I see, in essence, I said the three words. The three words that you have to say, some form or another, before you can be part of the group. And that is, God help me. God help me. God help me. God help me. I love you, and I appreciate you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Dick. That was wonderful. I'll do that while I do that. I'd like again to offer a desire chip. If anyone would like to stay sober one day at a time, does anybody like a desire chip tonight? In keeping with the seventh tradition of Alcoholics Anonymous, that all groups shall be self-supporting through their own contributions, we pass the basket at this meeting.